Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I'm here today because we are heading into probably my favorite time of the year. It's the holiday season for one thing, but we're also heading into best books of the year season. I love it. Washington Post has struck first this year and I am so excited to look at this list. Before we begin, just very quickly, there will be links to all of the books that I'm going to talk about in the description box down below, both the physical book and the ebook. If you want more information about any of these books, you can use those links. They take you to bookshop.org, which also means you can purchase copies of the book there. And if you use those links, it does give me a little bit of a kickback if I help spark an interest in any of these books for you. You could also support independent bookshops directly because Bookshop does also support independent bookstores. But, you know, if you order from your local indie or just an indie that you like, you are supporting them. And also you can support your local library because that is also a very important thing to do. I will also have links to past versions of the Washington Post's 10 best books. I'll have a link to last year's New York Times best 10 books and the last year's 100 notable list from the New York Times. And we're going to go through the list and then I will talk about some books that I'm surprised not to see on this list. So let's get going. I'm going to start at the top of the list. It's a very good place to start, which means we're going to begin with fiction. So the Washington Post selected 10 best books and 5 of them are fiction, 5 of them are nonfiction. So we're going to start with the fiction and then work our way to nonfiction. Then we'll talk about the books I'm surprised are not here. Later on, I'm going to film a video reacting to the Washington Post's 50 notable books. They're stepping into that territory this year, so I want to take a look at their list, but that'll be a whole other video. Okay, the first book on the Washington Post's 10 best books of 2025 is Ruth by Kate Riley. The cover of this book is extremely familiar to me. I don't remember anything about what it's about. I feel like I remember seeing it when it was released, which I want to say was late summer. I don't know if I ever looked at a description. So that's one of the reasons I like looking at lists like this. It helps me find books that maybe passed me by and rethink whether or not I would like to add them to my pile of possibilities or TBR, whatever term you like to use. And also it can just help me discover books that pass me by completely. It's all very important and I think fun. So I'm going to read you the description of what they said about this book, and then we'll see if it's something I want to add to my list. Maybe it's something you want to add to your list. Those two things won't necessarily line up all the time, and that's fine. That's great. That's one of the fun things about talking about books with other people. We don't always have the same interests and it's all good. So here's what they say. Ruth, the impish narrator of Kate Riley's debut novel, is born into a little and little known Anabaptist sect in Michigan. Riley, drawing on her own experience, feels no rush to lay out the group's beliefs. We come to feel the tight dimensions of this community just as Ruth does, with a mixture of innocence and incredulity. Riley finds plenty of comedy in the customs of these earnest folks, but it comes with a place of affection and frustration rather than derision. What really interests her is a bright child's mind, Ruth's questions, her wanderings, and her disruptive sense of humor. Riley's style, informed by decades of sermons, aphorisms, and comic retorts, ensures the novel's delightful buoyancy. That does actually sound very interesting. So if you have read Ruth by Kate Riley, I would love to hear what you thought of it. If you follow along at all and you have a sense of books that I like, I would love to hear if you think it's something that I would enjoy. So let me know that in the comment section down below. I think when I'm done filming, I will probably look for other reviews of this book because just from that, it sounds like something that I would like to catch up to. I don't know when, but definitely something that catches my interest. So I am eager to learn more about this book for myself. The next book is The Slip by Lucas Schaefer, which in hindsight is not much of a surprise. I did feel surprised when I saw it on this list, but given that it did win the Kirkus Prize for fiction this year, I shouldn't be too surprised. I'll link my video where I talked about the Kirkus Prize and its selection of this book as the winner. And I was even surprised when they announced it, because even among just the little headlines that they used, the headline that they used, or like the quick blurb that's extracted from the review, it felt a little more tepid about The Slip than it did about any of the other finalists, but they chose it. I've gotten a little bit of mixed feedback, but mostly positive feedback about this book. I would be curious to read it for myself. I don't think I will be doing that before the end of the year. So maybe in January or February, if everything goes well, I will try to catch up to this book. But here's what they say about it. Schaeffer's sweaty, outrageous debut is about Nathaniel Rothstein, a troubled 16-year-old from a Boston suburb who is sent to Austin to spend the summer with an uncle. The uncle introduces him to David, a trainer at a local boxing gym. Nathaniel is fascinated by David, a charismatic black man from Haiti who is everything the white teenager isn't, but suddenly wants to be. Fit, confident, sexually experienced, Schaeffer's narration is wildly, transgressively hilarious, reminiscent of Philip Roth's early novels. The Slip explores large themes about race in America and the human urge to slide into another identity. This is a high-wire act, but the breadth of Schaeffer's affection feels as wide as the depth of his comedy. And we are seeing a bit of a theme here in that they mentioned that Kate Riley had affection for the character she's writing about, and now we're seeing it again with this book. And I do like that. I don't like it when it feels like an author is judging someone harshly and wants you to do the same. I feel like the book just tends to work better if they offer a more nuanced portrait of someone and maybe don't necessarily ask you to dislike them, but give you the full story so maybe you can appreciate if somebody has good qualities and things like that. So one of the things that sort of scared me about The Slip is that when it won the Kirkus Prize, I saw a lot of comparisons, not just to Philip Roth, but to Jonathan Franzen and someone else. And Philip Roth, I have read books that I have enjoyed, but I have also read some that I did not enjoy. Jonathan Franzen, I have never finished a book of his that I started. And to be fair, I only started 2, but I just have not enjoyed the experience to the point where I haven't finished them. And my neighbor actually just attempted to read a Jonathan Franzen book and really struggled to get through it. And I think if it wasn't for a book club, she probably wouldn't have finished it. So the fact that The Slip is so often compared to Jonathan Franzen and Philip Roth, who I've been very uneven on, it makes me hesitate. However, I'd be interested in trying it for myself. And I think that's also part of why I am interested in reading this book, but I do not think that I will be catching up to it before the end of the year. There are other things that I would probably like to catch up to before I would get to this one. Let's move on to the next book, which is Stoneyard Devotional by Charlotte Wood. This is interesting because the Stoneyard Devotional came out in the UK last year, 2024, and was on the shortlist for the Booker Prize last year. It didn't win, but this is one of those scenarios where, because release dates are often different in the UK and in the United States, it feels like the discourse on Stoneyard Devotional already happened last year. And it was released in the United States earlier in 2025, so it does qualify for this list, but it just feels like this is late to the party because there was already so much conversation about Stoneyard Devotional in 2024. And most people that have commented on my videos read it when it was on the Booker long list and then short list. There are some people who caught up to it when it was published here, but it just feels like the discourse is late. And that's one of the things I understand, that it's difficult to pick books that would land or people would be interested in on both sides of the pond. But, and to be fair, I don't know if it would have been easy to predict Stoneyard Devotional to be such a big book, because the Booker Prize is really what put a big spotlight on this book. So it's difficult to say, books should just be published in both places at the same time. understand the difficulties, and I think it's pretty clear that Stoneyard Devotional would not have been an obvious choice for that, but, you know, it's just frustrating. It's kind of like Great British Bake Off. They air episodes on Tuesday over there, and we get them on Friday on Netflix, and that just means that for about 3 days, I have to try to avoid spoilers until I can actually watch the episode. You know, the world has become a lot smaller because of the internet, so it would feel a little bit better if we could be having these conversations at the same time. But anyway, here's what they say about this book. The unnamed narrator of Stoneyard Devotional, a novel of great restraint and wisdom, is a woman of a certain age who's joined a remote Catholic order. Or, if not joined, at least moved in. Nobody there asks, but she confesses that she's an atheist. Why she is in this abbey is a source of persistent mystery in this novel, which is built on the same rock of introspection that anchors Marilynne Robinson's Gilead series. There are petty disagreements, but no real conflicts, no scandals, no affairs. And yet the quiet, intensely private voice feels more intimate than a library of confessional novels. This is a spiritual journey narrated by a woman who would scoff at such a phrase. And interesting, given the fact that I was talking about how it feels like the discourse on this book happened last year, I actually haven't read it yet. I am curious to read it. I just haven't managed to do it yet. So this is definitely a book that I would like to catch up to. And the comparison to Marilynne Robinson there really does enhance my interest in reading this book. So we'll see when I get around to that. Now we get to the first book that I actually have a copy of. It is The Wayfinder by Adam Johnson. Adam Johnson is a Pulitzer Prize winning author for The Orphan Master's Son. I have not read any of his books yet, but I'm really looking forward to them. And this one is it's a big book. It's also very pretty. It has that sort of gold foil that shines when you move it around, but the book itself is also gorgeous. You have these end papers, but also on the book itself, more of those gold foil stars. And I just think that is absolutely gorgeous. I haven't read this. I have heard some mixed things about this book so far, and that does make me feel like this isn't one that I want to prioritize before the end of the year, but it is one that I want to catch up to at some point. I do have access to the audio. I think that is probably the way that I will go, but it's interesting to see it pop up here because the fact that there were so many mixed reactions to this book made me feel that it wasn't going to be showing up on year-end best lists. And here it is on the Washington Post's. Here is what they say about The Wayfinder. The Wayfinder takes place almost 1,000 years ago in Polynesia, but its real setting is that realm beyond time and place where mortals contend with gods and mythology and history merge like twinned tree trunks. In his first novel since he won the 2013 Pulitzer Prize for The Orphan Master's Son, Johnson boldly melds magic and psychological realism to cast a captivating spell. Brief aside, he did publish a book between The Orphan Master's Son and The Wayfinder. It was a collection of short stories. So it is his first novel since The Orphan Master's Son, but I think it was Fortune Smiles was published in between, and it was a collection of short stories. I am a defender of short stories, so I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that here. Okay, this long book is stuffed with wild adventure and unforgettable characters. Villains worthy of Shakespeare, princes on the run, a teenage girl intent on saving her community, a king whose empire is about to fall. This astonishing novel, at once so primeval and so sophisticated, pulses with the same hopes and terrors that first pricked our imaginations around a fire as the sun set. That is a very captivating blurb about this book. I'm already interested, but it does make me want to try it for myself. I don't think I'm going to manage to do it before the end of the year, but I do want to read The Wayfinder and see what I think for myself. We have one more fiction book, and it's one that I'm really excited about. Haven't read it yet. I did read the first 10 pages of it, and then I put it to the side because I was really struggling to read the very first chapter, not because of the content of the book, but because of grief stuff that I'm still working through and all of that. If you're following along, maybe you remember this. It was recent. I'm talking about The Wilderness by Angela Flournoy. I have been trying to avoid the sunbeam that is coming through this window, but it's happening. It's just happening. I am a big fan of Angela Flournoy's The Turner House, which I didn't have a YouTube channel when I read, but if I had, that is a book that probably would have been my entire personality the year in which I read it. I just absolutely loved that book, and I have been waiting for her to publish something else. So when I heard that The Wilderness was coming out, I was extremely excited about that. And the fact that it has gotten such good feedback has really made me excited to dive in. Now, the grief that I am on a journey with is sort of centered around Thanksgiving, but also around the end of the year. So I'm hoping that there's going to be this little lull after Thanksgiving and before we really get into Christmas, where I will be up to this, because it's just, that opening chapter is about a granddaughter and her grandfather, and she has taken him to Europe where he is seeking assisted suicide, like end of life care, I should say. And that was just hitting a little hard. But I am desperate to read this book and catch up to it. I think there's Pulitzer potential here. I'm kind of hoping that comes to pass, but we'll have to get into that in 2026 when we get closer to the announcement of the Pulitzer Prize. Here's what they say. Flournoy's vivid second novel treats the subject of friendship with the dignity and fascination it deserves. Over more than 2 decades, the relationships among Desiree, Nakia, January, and Monique withstand stressors of all kinds: geographical distance, philosophical difference, professional aspiration, postpartum distress. But there is no sentimental conclusion about the strength of their devotion. Some of the women are closer than others as they share love in all its contradictions and complexities, its steadfastness and its periods of imbalance. Each member of the quartet offers her own point of view, but Desiree emerges as the dominant voice. The novel moves among places, and its descriptions of Los Angeles in particular are incandescent, blending odes to its beauty with fears for its future. I'm so looking forward to reading this book, and I just cannot wait. All right, we're going to get into nonfiction. I am much more of a fiction reader. So, although I actually haven't read any of the books on the fiction side, I want to, but I have definitely not read any of the books on the nonfiction side. And there are a lot of them that I'm unfamiliar with. But we'll talk about that as we go through. The first one is The Fate of the Day, The War for America, Fort Ticonderoga to Charleston, 1777 to 1780 by Rick Atkinson. Rick Atkinson is a huge nonfiction author. I believe he is a Pulitzer Prize winner. Actually, yes, it says on the cover of the book, winner of the Pulitzer Prize. So I haven't read any of his books, but I consistently hear good things about them. As someone who doesn't read a whole lot of nonfiction, they are very long and seem like very involved histories. Like, this book covers 3 years. But that's not to denigrate the books. It just means that it feels like a bit of a hard sell for me. So if you follow along and you know me and you think I should get over myself, let me know in the comment section down below. But when I read nonfiction, it tends to be a different sort of nonfiction. Here's what they say. The second volume in Atkinson's remarkably ambitious planned trilogy about the American Revolution infuses the events and leaders of the war with striking vibrancy, essentially bringing the conflict to life again. Atkinson writes with tremendous verve and detail. The book's portraits of figures like George Washington and Benjamin Franklin are indispensable, and Atkinson humanizes those on the other side of the conflict as well, from King George to rowdy British parliamentarians to redcoat officers occupying South Carolina. His portrait of America's arch-traitor, Benedict Arnold, is thorough and brilliant. Readers are subtly nudged into considering what might have been and what could still be. Our cause is noble, Washington is quoted as saying. It is the cause of mankind, and the danger to it springs from ourselves. And aren't we seeing that in the world today? For sure. It does sound really interesting. It's just not the type of nonfiction I typically read. So again, if you have read this book and you think I should reconsider, let me know in the comment section down below. Next, we have A Flower Traveled in My Blood, the incredible true story of the grandmothers who fought to find a stolen generation of children by Haley Cohen Gilliland, or Gilliland. I hope one of those is correct. This is one that I have not heard of at all. Let's see what they say. After a military coup in Argentina in 1976, the dictator Jorge Rafael Videla led the country through a years-long national reorganization process, systematically disappearing about 30,000 supposed subversives. Among them were more than 300 pregnant women. A brave and stalwart group, known as the Abuelas de Plaza de Mayo, began protesting across from Videla's presidential mansion for the return of their children and grandchildren. In 1979 and 1980, they located the first sets of stolen grandchildren, who had been kidnapped as toddlers and infants, left in public places, and adopted by unsuspecting families who were operating in good faith. In this deeply researched and cinematically told work of history, Gilliland, or Gilliland, uses the story of a single family to illuminate the broader devastation and the fight to hold those responsible accountable. I know of disappearing in South America during that time period. I have never actually learned a whole lot about it. So this is actually a book that could potentially be interesting to me. I may check to see if the audio of it is available, because I tend to read nonfiction books on audio rather than in print. I just do better with them that way for whatever reason. So I could potentially be interested in that one. Next, we have Gertrude Stein and Afterlife by Francesca Wade. I only know very surface level details of Gertrude Stein's life, so it could be very interesting for me to catch up to a book about her. Let's see what they say. Francesca Wade's biography tells the story of the modernist American writer, her famed social life in Paris, and the long path of her reputation. She was friends with Henri Matisse and Pablo Picasso. Regulars at the fabled salon at her Parisian home included Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and Ezra Pound. When she died at 72 in 1946, Stein was not yet comfortably canonized. It was emphatically not for her lack of trying. Quote, "I have been the creative literary mind of the century," end quote, she once proclaimed. Many of her notoriously idiosyncratic texts languished unpublished. Critics remained fiercely divided over the quality of her incantatory and repetitive writings. In the end, Stein had to entrust those who outlived her to secure her designation as the high priestess of literary modernism. That does sound interesting. I've actually also never read a work by Gertrude Stein, so I'm not sure if this would be the best entry point for me. If you've read this book or if you've read Gertrude Stein, let me know what you think, because I would be very curious to learn more about her life, and I just don't know if that would be a good starting point. Let me know what you think. All right, next is Melting Point, Family, Memory, and the Search for a Promised Land by Rachel Cockerell. I don't even know what this one is about, so let's just dive in. In the early 20th century, Cockerell's great-grandfather David Jokelman was part of the Galveston Plan, a globally coordinated effort to bring thousands of Eastern Europe's increasingly desperate Jews to what might seem the unlikeliest of places, Southeast Texas. 10,000 Russian Jews sailed to the port city of Galveston and settled there in waves from 1907 until 1914. The plan involved notable figures like Theodor Herzl, one of the founders of modern Zionism, and Israel Zangwill, a Jewish-English novelist known in his day as the Jewish Dickens. Cockerell began writing a conventional family history, but eventually made it a purely archival project. The book is told entirely in excerpts taken from newspapers, diaries, books, and letters, brilliantly arranged. The effect is electric, plunging readers into an intense, vivid, often contradictory set of observations, as if experiencing history as it unfolds. That does sound very interesting. I think I would be more likely to read A Flower Traveled in My Blood for myself, but if you've read this book, I could be convinced. Let me know what you thought of it in the comment section down below. And then we have just one more book before we start talking about what I'm surprised is not here. Motherland, A Feminist History of Modern Russia from Revolution to Autocracy by Julia Ioffe. Here's what they say. By 1920, Russia had made some of the most feminist advances of any country, including reproductive rights, no-fault divorces, and free university education. Women routinely became doctors and engineers. In the riveting Motherland, Russian-American journalist Ioffe blends history and family biography to tell the story of the early 20th century in Russia by centering the stories of lesser-known but influential women, rather than famous and infamous men. These include Alexandra Kollontai, an ardent Bolshevik who was the first woman in the world to be appointed to a government cabinet. Ioffe examines tensions and contradictions to ask what happened in the radical ideal of the Soviet woman. Oh, I did terribly with that. Let's start over. Ioffe examines tensions and contradictions to ask what happened to the radical ideal of the Soviet woman, the one she internalized from her own upbringing and the extraordinary ordinary women like those in her own family. I do really appreciate histories that give stories back or agency back to women who have been sort of erased from that history. Hallie Rubenhold had a great true crime version of a story like that when she wrote The Five, which centers the story of the victims of Jack the Ripper and not Jack the Ripper himself, or speculation about what Jack the Ripper's identity would be. So this could be interesting to me. If you've read it, let me know what you thought of it in the comment section down below. So that's the top 10. Let's talk about books that I'm a little surprised not to see. Admittedly, with the fiction side of the list, I think it's interesting. They do sound like good books. The Wayfinder in particular is one that I'm very urgent to read or feel like desperate to read. But ordinarily, there's a bit more blending of like really popular books that have been critically acclaimed all year long and some lesser known books that they want to bubble up to the top and maybe encourage people to catch up to. And this list from the Washington Post seems a little more in the vein of, bubbling books up that you might have missed. And I don't fault that, but it makes it a little bit surprising that some of the quote-unquote biggest books of the year are not there, including Audition by Katie Kitamura and Flashlight by Susan Choi. I feel like these are the books that have gotten the most acclaim so far in 2025. I read Audition and I'm not a huge fan, but I can see what other people would like about it, and maybe the fact that they're not here is going to show some vulnerabilities that these books might have, but it'll be interesting to see if they get included on the New York Times list. I'm willing to bet that one or both of them will appear. Before I show the next one, let me just see if I move to this side. No, it's not going to get a whole lot better. So I'm going to stay trying to hide in my shadowy corner over here. But yeah, definitely surprised that neither of these, I wouldn't expect both of them necessarily, but it feels like one of them would get in. All right. In addition to that, there's The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny by Kiran Desai. I DNF'd this book. I just was having a very hard time getting into it, and the fact that it's such a long book made me feel like this just isn't going to be for me. But a lot of people have liked it. It was on the shortlist for the Booker Prize. And again, it just feels like a book that would be ready-made for a year-end best of list. So I don't expect all of the books that I'm going to mention here to have made it, but it feels like at least like one or two of them could have slipped in any other year. And it is what it is. I'm also surprised to not see A Guardian and a Thief by Megha Majumdar. That's another one of the books that is shaping up to be one of the most consistently regarded books of the year. And it will be interesting to see which or any of the books that I've mentioned so far will show up on the New York Times top 10, Publishers Weekly's top 10, and so on and so forth. Getting a little more, not esoteric, but leaning into books that had been popular earlier in the year and some books that I would have liked to see. I think the first one is Isola by Allegra Goodman. It feels like this was very consistently named one of the best books of the year so far in the first half of 2025. And maybe this is an indication that it's going to begin getting crowded out. of the conversation is we have the books from the second half of 2025 now. I still desperately want to catch up to this book. I'm really looking forward to it, but I've heard so many good things about it. And then we get into The Correspondent by Virginia Evans. Now, I love The Correspondent. I can admittedly see why it might not show up, say, here. It feels a little bit like The Correspondent has been a word of mouth hit. After it was a couple months after its release, it hit the New York Times bestseller list for the first time. That is rare. And that means that people have been talking about this book, recommending this book, and people are discovering. So you could call it like an audience favorite, maybe not necessarily a critical favorite, which means I'm not surprised that it didn't get recognized here, but I really love the book and I think it would be worthy of a spot on a list like this. So there we are. And then we have one of my favorite books of the year so far, The Imagined Life by Andrew Porter. I absolutely love this book. I am desperate to read more of Andrew Porter's work. I have 2 of his books on my shelf and I absolutely loved this book so much. And I would love to see it get recognized more. That is a book that I would bubble up to the top of people's attention so they can discover it as well. And, there it is. Also, Blackwood's Blue Sky by Eowyn Ivey. I was really excited about this book. I loved this book. It came out in February and hasn't gotten the level of conversation that I would have personally given it, but I have also seen some mixed reactions to this book, but I absolutely love it too. It is still one of my favorite reads of the year. And for me, I would love to see it recognized for what I think is the quality book that it is. All right, let's talk about some nonfiction books that I'm surprised. As I said, I don't read as much nonfiction as fiction, but I do follow nonfiction a bit. So I am surprised not to see One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This by Omar Al-Akkad. That won the nonfiction prize for the National Book Awards recently, and has been very consistently recommended, and I've heard so much great feedback on it. It feels like a very urgent book for our time. So I am very surprised that it didn't make it onto this list. Then Baldwin, A Love Story by Nicholas Boggs. It feels like I have been recommended this book right and left. And this is a nonfiction book that I would absolutely read and just have not managed to do yet. So I'm a little surprised and a little disappointed not to see it on a best of list, but there you are. And then the last one would be Memorial Days by Geraldine Brooks. It feels like a different kind of nonfiction than what they clearly leaned toward in crafting their list, but it is a very beautiful and tender and introspective memoir about Geraldine Brooks losing her husband, and I think it's beautiful. So that's the last book that I would point out. I would love to hear your thoughts about this list. Is there anything that I didn't cover that I'm surprised not to see that you would add to the list? Do you have thoughts about the overall quality of the list, recommendations? Let's make the comment section a bit of a resource for other people coming to this video, because we can recommend books that we like in the year, and hopefully people will be able to go to the comments and discover other books as well. That's kind of part of my intention here. So let me know what you think of the list. Add those book recommendations. And as always, I really appreciate your time. I'll be back when the New York Times does its 100 Notable. I will be doing that Washington Post 50 Notable list and the New York Times Top 10. Lots of exciting things to come. Stay tuned for all of that. Until next time, happy reading.